Welcome to GTM Global's last event of 2020 on how to fund your global expansion in 2021. Before I introduce you to our exciting and venerable panelists, let me explain a bit about GTM Global and what we do and how we've changed since March of 2020 when the pandemic hit. GTM is an ecosystem that connects high growth scale-ups in digital and tech to resonant experts from government, trade and commercial partners to enable their international expansion. Up until March, this was done by online content and messaging and getting our scale-ups and mentor partners to meet via a series of one-to-one physical workshops in metro workspaces in London, Manchester, Birmingham and Cambridge. Since the lockdown, we've moved to an entirely online model, which has meant we can connect to more of our scale-up companies, to more of our mentors, more frequently and more effectively. Now more than ever in this post-Brexit world, we need to be informed and engaged about how you can grow your business globally, agilely, and across borders. We can see that despite the hardships and privations of the last 9 months, tech has triumphed and it is well placed to grow internationally in 2021. So we have brought together a fantastic group of experts who can help you grow your tech in 2021. And to start, we're going to get an overview of the scene from 3 heavyweights who in the worlds of finance, funding and tech to tell us what is hot and what is not.
While we wait, so I know you're going to run
hello. Can you turn off your mic?
Documents now from
I'll start again from that point. We've brought together a fantastic group of experts to help you grow your tech in 2020. And to start with, we're going to get an overview on the scene from those 3 heavyweights in the world of finance, funding, and tech to tell us what is hot and what is not. And we'll then ask my colleague and co-founder Ian Collins to look at ways to secure and win funding for your global growth before he introduces a further panel of UK, US investors, commercial borrowers, grants and loan specialists and NEDs, so you can follow the money. And finally, the baton will come back to me and I'll introduce you to how to make the money count in terms of payment, tax, IP and talent. But let's start with our first sage on the stage, and that's Jeff Parker, CEO World First. Jeff, it's been a massive year for change, and change brings opportunity. What do you predict will be the hot topics from a financial and trade perspective in 2021 globally?
Hey, Mark. Well, firstly, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for dialing in. I think it's going to be a great session. I know there's lots of great topics and speakers coming up, so I'm looking forward to listening to them myself. But it's a pretty big question, and I think often in my role, I'm often asked around, what does the future look like, both for business generally, but also for payments. And I think to answer that with kind of any sense of credibility, it probably makes sense to almost look a bit back to help us look forward. And I think obviously this year has been fairly unprecedented, and I think obviously no one could have predicted COVID. But I think one of the undisputable facts is that the trend of 2020 has been the shift to online and e-commerce and the acceleration of the digital economy. And I'm a strong believer that adoption and increased use of digital will continue. And I think that's really exciting for SMEs. I think it brings a lot of huge opportunities for everyone in that space. I think that shift is permanent. I think there's lots of surveys out there that have said they've seen increased adoption and significant adoption. And I think, we've seen businesses large and small throughout this year really kind of trying to pivot their businesses really quickly and pivoting from, I guess, traditional offline businesses to try and move online. And I've been kind of personally quite amazed in terms of some of the innovation that we've seen. We've seen businesses like, I don't know, dog walking businesses or ballet classes or other forms of things that we couldn't, we thought were physical activities, and actually we're now seeing them being run as online businesses. And I guess with that context, how does that then project to what we're going to see in the future? At World First, we're supporting SMEs on a daily basis. We help people move money around. We're an international payments business, but we're speaking to entrepreneurs and CEOs of small businesses all the time. And I think, while there's been a huge number of challenges for these businesses over the last year, I think that's also at the same time, because of their smaller size and their agility, they've actually been able to pivot and take advantage of some of these. And I think that ability to be agile and to adapt, I think will continue and will bring opportunities to those that can do that most effectively. You know, I think over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen huge changes in terms of online tools and capabilities. We've seen online marketplaces like Amazon, you know, really make that international trade much easier. And more recently, we've seen platforms like Shopify and Wix and Arcadia that have allowed businesses to take their business and market it to a global audience almost at the switch of a button. And where historically, I think payments has also been kind of a tricky part of that. Payments has often been kind of the barrier. You know, the new pay tech that we're seeing with Stripe, Square, Alipay, and all those types of businesses is really making that transition much easier. So I guess where does that bring us to this year? I think for me personally, I think we're going to see a few trends. I think the first one hopefully is that we see COVID you know, come to more of a conclusion, and people can start to come to some of normality or whatever that is. But I think for me, there's three key trends. I think we'll see the digitalization trend continue. I think it'll potentially accelerate. And we'll see that work all the way through the value chain. So whatever part of the value chain your business is in, whether it's upfront from a consumer experience perspective, whether it's kind of at the checkout space, whether you're all the way through on the supply chain, you know, making payments, receiving funds and from buyers. So I think digitalization is sure to continue. I think interestingly, what we'll then see is we'll see some of the traditional businesses rebound. So things like travel and offline that have been really kind of had a difficult 2020. I think they're going to really come to the fore, but I think we'll probably see them come to the fore as a different business, probably as a more integrated omni-channel experiences. So they're mixing the traditional offline with their online experiences, which can only be beneficial for the consumers. We're going to have better enhanced customer experiences. And I think some of those traditional businesses will have unfortunately not made it, but that in itself presents opportunities for those other businesses to be able to kind of step into their shoes. And I think the third thing we're going to see is an acceleration of almost a reverse trend where we're seeing online and tech businesses starting to move offline into physical, you know, where they're leveraging their cheaper cost base, their great logistics and fulfillment capability, and they might actually move into physical. So we've already seen it with Amazon and with eBay starting to have physical stores, but I think we could continue to see that trend reemerge. So I think just to finish it in there, I think with all three of these things, I think there's some common themes, and for me that's disruption. And I think with disruption comes innovation. With innovation comes opportunity. And for me, this is kind of the start of the beginning. I think it was always coming, but COVID's accelerated some of that. And so, you know, while it's impossible for anyone to predict exactly what's in store for 2021, I think for me, if I'm an SME in this space, I've survived, I've managed to pivot. I think there's huge opportunities ahead of us. And for me personally, I'm really excited about what does that mean for our customers, but also what does that mean for the role that World First can play in helping some of these small businesses explore and expand their businesses overseas.
Jeff, thank you. And some fascinating themes there that we'll come back to in our panel with you and our other two experts. And I want to bring in, if I can now, David Golding, Head of North America, Head of Americas, I should say, from Innovate UK. David, what do you see from a funding perspective as the key themes and takeaways for 2021?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and again, good to be here, and thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. I suppose we need to look at things in terms of the backdrop of COVID, EU exit, both of which are challenging, and obviously the latter one we still don't have clarity around. At the same time, I think we're seeing obviously a lot of free trade agreements being put in place. So the latest with Singapore and Vietnam. So I think, you know, a lot of things are starting to open up. And certainly what we see is that governments globally are looking at, you know, where do they invest their money in future? And I think certainly science innovation is seen very much as one of those big areas to invest, particularly as, you know, a lot of that really drives the economy. So, you know, you only have to look at the UK and the fact that, you know, SMEs are really a key part of the economy moving forward. You know, how do we continue to invest in those types of companies and support those types of companies is key. I think we're starting to see a bit of look around technology sovereignty. So certainly that's a phrase which is coming into parlance quite a bit, with countries looking at how do they ensure that they have the technology capability to sort of, you know, ensure that they can operate without being affected if there are other things like pandemics. And I think, what we're seeing at the moment is certainly for the UK government are keen to invest much more into science innovation. There will be a refreshed industrial strategy early in 2021. And I suppose it's all very much around finding the UK's place in the world in future. And I think looking at, how do we prepare potentially for another pandemic if we need to. So a lot of investment going in that area, but also, a lot of funding going into looking at, how do we build back better, as the phrase goes, but build better and greener. And I think that focus on clean tech as well. So I think health and clean tech areas where we're probably going to see much more funding going into those areas, as well as how do we respond to particular challenges. If I look at Innovate, it's been our busiest year ever. We're still very busy. And that's really due to a strong appetite from companies to want to continue to do R&D and innovation in the UK, but it's also true globally. And I think, we're seeing people want to look at what the opportunities are. Europe is still a big market. We need to understand, how that's going to pan out. But people are looking at, how do you explore the globe much more actively. And I think what we're seeing now is people recognizing that, they can go and visit Singapore in the morning and go and visit the US in the afternoon, and not move out of their bedroom or study or wherever they're working from. And I think people are recognizing the value of doing things virtually. I don't think you can ever quite replicate meeting people and looking in the whites of their eyes, but a lot of people are certainly adapting to that virtual model excuse me, much more. And I think it's opening up conversations that perhaps it would have been much more difficult to meet people previously. So all of those things are certainly opening up. For Innovate, obviously we've got all our grants and loans which we're helping to support companies, and we'll continue to do that. And Emma will be talking from KTN about those a bit later. We've got our Global Business Innovation Programme, where again we're supporting companies to look at global opportunities, and we'll be rolling out a number of those in the new year, as well as our Global Incubator Programme, where we just put 8 companies virtually into New York for 6 months. Hopefully we can get them there physically at some point. It would be good, but let's wait and see. So I think there's lots of support out there. Say Emma will talk a bit about the KTN in future, later. And Innovate UK will be launching its new business growth support early in January. So there's lots of support out there for companies, whether it's funding or just the ability to make connections and open doors. And we're keen to do that. So, if people are looking for, how do they access different countries or look at, building partnerships or collaborations, then, please feel free to contact us, and we'll, try and help you where we can, and, sort of breaking down the doors and removing the barriers as much as we can. So I think there's plenty of support funding out there to help companies. Often it's certainly the funding is quite competitive, but what we see, and certainly building on the points that Jeff made, is that I think there's huge opportunities out there. There's a lot of disruption. Innovation can capitalize on that. So I think be bold, be brave, and go and sort of seek those opportunities out, really. So I think it's looking like an interesting 2021, but one with a lot of opportunities if people are prepared to seize them, really.
David, thank you. I love the phrase technology sovereignty. I think that's fantastic. And on that note, let's turn to Samantha Evans, who's Head of International at TechNation. And Sam, from your perspective, that phrase technology sovereignty must be quite resonant, because there must be some really interesting sectors who you think could go big in 2021.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting us to talk today. For those who don't know, TechNation, we're a growth platform for tech companies and leaders. We've worked with around 700 companies in the last 6 years who have collectively raised around $20 million, probably worth about $100 million. So this is all in our space. We've worked with probably about 24%, I think it is, of the UK tech unicorns ever created. So we've got a pretty good alumni group, and obviously talking to them a lot about what's happening and where their growth is. So basically we provide growth programs, content, community, coaching and policy engagement to ensure that conditions are right for growth across companies. And I've recently been brought in to help with helping our alumni companies to grow internationally. We see that's a huge part of what we're doing. You know, we didn't know what was going to happen in 2020, and it's been a real year of rapid growth globally, and we've all seen that. And the UK digital tech ecosystem hasn't been affected in a bad way from that. We've seen 3 new unicorns across the UK, and you know, we use Hopin ourselves, and who would have known that we'd have a double unicorn, which was an online events platform this time last year. I mean, I just returned from living in San Francisco this time last year, and the tech scene was thriving in the UK, and I still see that's happening now. We're busier than ever. We've started a lot of new programs, and Hopin really helped us transform the way that we're delivering our programs over 2020 by doing it all virtually and still having that impact with the companies. It'll be interesting to see if that continues once the vaccine's implemented. My view is that there'll be a hybrid. I've enjoyed going to events and conferences around the world, especially in this new role. We cover all of the world from my role, so it saved me a lot of time and a lot of travel, probably saved the planet a little bit too. So Mark's asked me to kind of have a look at where we see the growth sectors are, but I also want to talk about growth markets, and we've just mentioned a couple of those previously as well. So I think it's equally important to look at those growth markets for the tech companies on the call today. So one of the areas I always like to think about is space. There's a lot of space missions happening and planned for 2020. Whether they know something that we don't, who knows? But you know, with the world as it is at the moment, I think we need to look at all different opportunities. But obviously, it's the satellites and telecoms that we're interested in with the companies that we work with. How do we tackle climate change through Earth observation, address satellite communication challenges, providing greater connectivity for remote places, which has been super important this year, and increasing the efficiencies of our homes. So I think there's going to be a huge focus on that this year, especially as we all go global and we're trying to hit more of these remote places that don't have access to digital. And one of the things I was looking at recently, actually, which I thought was interesting, and it's a bit Elon Musky, was a Houston-based space tech startup that have announced that they're going to be launching the first ever luxury space hotel in the Earth's orbit by 2021. I mean, none of us have travelled anywhere this year. When I moved back to the UK, I didn't expect to be sat in my Wimbledon flat for 9 months and not seeing anyone after nearly 10 years overseas. But the company says that they're going to be ready to accommodate visitors next year. The price for a 12-day ticket is only $9.5 million per person. So if anyone's looking for a +1, I'd be interested in that. But also, you know, I'll be really interested to see what's happening with the Spacecom Expo that's happening in Farnborough in May. So to be seen what innovations are coming out of there. The second part that I'm looking at is around 3D printing of food. 3D printing is not new, and we all know that, but you know, how long is it going to be for it to come to the market with 3D printing of food? And how long will it be for the mass consumer adoption of that? It's something that I've been looking at a lot. I've seen the steaks that have been 3D printed and, you know, wondering how that tastes, but also thinking about the impacts of farming and agriculture on the climate. So I definitely think that that's an interesting area to watch. Of course, you know, it's been mentioned before, health, wellness. That's going to be obviously a growth area. We've also seen a lot around sustainability as a country has obviously tried to build back better, as mentioned earlier. AI and automation. I think we all are looking for efficiencies in our personal lives as well as in business. And one of the key areas for us as we're looking internationally for our companies is the net zero program that we've recently started. It's our newest program, and it concentrates on scaling tech businesses that are transforming the society with global climate change. So it's companies like who are maybe decarbonising energy systems, they are creating zero carbon homes, they're working with sustainable farming revolutions and different transport infrastructures. So there's been a lot of talk around all the countries, you know, especially with China now saying that they're going to be net zero by 2050, I think they said 2060. So that's going to be a huge growth area with lots of potential. And lastly, which has been mentioned, is e-com, with everyone going online, and the ad tech that's matched the demand of that. I just wanted to quickly touch on the global growth. I don't want to take up too much time, but I think this plays in well with the e-com side of it. As we enter the final stages of Brexit and the start of the recovery after COVID, what we're pushing, our message to all of the tech companies that we work with, is to diversify and strengthen their client base globally. I've been doing a lot of work recently, looking at what's the best opportunities for UK tech companies outside of the EU and the US. Because although I've just spent almost 10 years in the US, I think it's the road well trodden. You know, there's a lot of advice and examples of good and bad practice for companies around global growth into the US. But there is always going to be huge potential for UK companies in the US. But I've also been working with the UK government around the Digital Trade Network, which is all around how do we help UK tech companies access business opportunities and do business and grow into the APAC region. And this goes back to the e-com example, and things that I've been learning that I hadn't realised, being so caught up in the US economy, is Southeast Asia registered 40 million first-time online users during COVID. And that brings the total up to 400 million, which is 70% of their region is now online, which is the same size of the US market. And it's thought that the next billion to come online will be from the region. So as the UK starts with the negotiations of the free trade agreements, which I know that the digital tech growth is really at the forefront of their mind. And as we mentioned, Japan, Singapore and Vietnam have just all gone through most recently. You know, I'm going to be watching that with interest and seeing where the opportunities lie. You know, Japan are looking at open data for their government. There's a lot of opportunities for our UK companies who've been doing that in the UK. To transfer their tech over there. And I'll also be looking at different regions with the agreements that come out from the emerging tech markets like Brazil, Mexico, South Africa and the UAE. There's a lot happening in those markets for our tech companies as well. So basically our message for 2021 is really to look at your international strategy and really try and build something sustainable so that if anything like this happens again, then we've got something to kind of fall back on. So that diversification is really important. Thanks.
Sam, thank you. Thank you. And I just want to bring the three of you together just to sort of bring the panel for a collective sort of note. And I think we probably just have to mention the B word, and I hope we do get a deal. But whatever happens, do you, Jeff and David and Sam, think that the Brexit experience is pushing more and more tech and digital companies to look at global, agile and borderless trade? And if you were to look at something that you would highlight there, what would that be? And Jeff, can I come back to you first?
Yeah, sure. I think without a doubt, any delay to the B word, as you say, any friction and lingering uncertainty around trade that exists within Europe is bound to push people to look elsewhere, you know, to do their business. They can't afford just to wait and see what happens and kind of just not do their business. And so, as I mentioned kind of earlier, I think the barriers to doing that international trade have been significantly reduced over the last few years. And I didn't touch on it much, but you know, one of the key parts of that around that is the supply chain and logistics. And you know, a business today can actually order their goods, buy them, pay for them, sell them, deliver them without even touching them. I mean, the technology exists now that you can actually run a complete business without actually having to see or touch any of those goods. And so that ability to take your business international, I think, is easier than it's ever been before. And I think once people find that those barriers are no longer there, and they start to go to those other markets, I don't think they suddenly stop as soon as kind of the B situation gets resolved. So yeah, I think it definitely pushes those businesses in the UK and Europe to look elsewhere, and I think that's an exciting opportunity for them, because I think maybe it's an opportunity they haven't explored before. And actually, when they actually look into the detail, it is perhaps easier than they thought it was. And as I say, I think across that whole piece, the connecting the buyer and the seller, the logistics piece, and finally the payments piece, they've all come on leaps and bounds in the last kind of 3 to 5 years, and I think we'll see a lot more innovation in the next 3 to 5 years as well in that space.
That's great.
Technological evolution and the gig economy is changing the nature of.
Sorry, someone's to cut in there, but Sam, obviously you've seen obviously some really interesting growth in APAC, and I know that's an area that Jeff's obviously has a great part in from his provenance. Do you see that as being a really high growth area moving forward? Obviously, there's the US as well, but your view on that sounds very very focused.
Yeah, I think that a lot of British businesses look at the US first. I spent a long time there, and there's a huge opportunity there, but it's also a graveyard for scale-ups. There's a lot of competition there. And I think that, with Brexit and diversifying how we work, I think the biggest problems or the biggest concerns on my side and the companies that I'm working with is the movement of people and the movement of data, and how that's going to be affected across the globe, and how do we get around that so that we can continue to work and do business. So those are the things that we're really focused on when we're speaking to Number 10 is, how do we resolve those issues so that there's no break in business for people.
That's really interesting. But also you mentioned, which I think's again very timely, a new president in the White House in January 2020, and he's going to have a huge focus around reinvigorating climate change. And David, your view, obviously, you've got a great insight into North America. That's going to drive a lot of trade in across the world, but obviously specifically into across the pond too, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the dynamics are certainly changing in the US at the moment, and I think we'll certainly see a greater focus by US government around climate change and green growth. So that certainly opens up opportunities. I mentioned we're working with an incubator in New York currently, so Urban Futures Lab, and they're a clean tech based incubator, but just talking to them last week, you can see that the whole way that US is looking at climate change is changing rapidly, and even they're sort of struggling to understand how it's moving so quickly. So I think certainly that opens up bigger opportunities. And coming back to your other question, it was I think over the last 4 years, we've probably seen companies start to look much more globally than they ever done in the past. So I think it's been a gradual change, but I think it will just be accelerated now even more as people really understand what the opportunities are of working not just within Europe, but actually that whole global market.
So if I was to ask each of you just one thing that you would really highlight for 2021, what would that be? Can I maybe, David, start with you? What would be that one piece that you would sort of say companies should do more about? I
think probably the biggest change we're going to see is around the exchange of data, actually, as Sam mentioned. I think that's going to really sort of see a big change, as well as the whole regulatory environment around that. And I think we'll have to see how that works. But I think the exchange of data, because markets are going to open up so much more, will be an interesting area to watch, and also lots of business opportunities coming out of that potentially.
How does that resonate with you, Sam? What would be a focal point for you in 2021?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with David. I think one of the things that we're also thinking about and how the movement of people if we've got people who then want to work remotely from other parts of the world, what implications does that have legally, with our tax, all of those different things? You know, we can't just take that for granted. I think that we've got to really look at that in more detail and see how that works. So I think the way we work is different now. And I think the data point is really important, and the security. You know, I'm sat in my house. My security is probably not as good as it would have been if I was in central London in our office. So I've not got anything secret on my computer that's of worth, so no one hacking, please. But yeah, I think that's really important. I think there's going to be a huge shift.
And of course, that, Jeff, data is a big part of your world, isn't it?
It's huge. I think David and Sam make great points. I think, to me, it's summarized in, you know, don't accept barriers that you think used to exist, because I think those barriers are coming down. And I was just looking at one of the chats there about, you know, sales tax comes in general. I mean, again, I think taxes is a great example why some people have previously struggled to or felt nervous about going into overseas markets. How do they stay compliant? But there are, you know, a bunch of businesses now. We're working with a business called Desukla that, you know, they specialize in managing your taxes in various jurisdictions. And so I would just say to, you know, I think you said it earlier on, Mark, kind of be bold. You know, there's lots of opportunity for next year. Maybe take a step back and think about, you know, what would you do if there were no barriers? Because I think a lot of those barriers are overcomable now.
Listen, guys, thank you so much for your sagacity and great contributions. We really appreciate you setting the tone of this webinar. We wish you all well in 2021. Thank you for your support for GTM in 2020.